The second task in the Goblet of Fire movie is an exhilarating underwater hunt in which Harry shows his moral fiber by not only trying to rescue Ron, but all 4 hostages in the lake. But what if I told you that the movie completely changed this moment? That in the book, Harry isn't helped by Neville, but by Dobby, and that the Mer people themselves vouched for Harry to get a higher score despite him arriving in last place. Today, we're going to unpack everything about Chapter 26 in the Goblet of Fire book, comparing it to this scene in the movie and finding every single change, revision, and omission along the way. My name is Gibby, and welcome back to episode 54 of Movies vs. Manuscripts, Harry Potter Edition. Welcome back to Fact or Fantasy Harry Potter, a channel dedicated to the wizarding world and everything in it. Shout out to this commenter from the last episode. If you want to be featured next, be sure to drop your thoughts below. Also, if you enjoy this type of content, be sure to subscribe and share with a Harry Potter loving friend. Per usual, I'll cover all the changes across the 4 major categories of characters, timeline, location, and plot. But first, let's recap what happened during this scene in the movie, that way it's fresh on our mind for the analysis. Picking up with where we left off in the last episode, with Harry figuring out the golden egg in the prefect's bathroom, the movie cuts to the trio in the library as they try to figure out how Harry will hold his breath underwater for an hour. Before they can do much, Moody arrives and takes Hermione and Ron to McGonagall's office, leaving Harry alone. Before he departs though, Moody assigns Neville to help Harry put his books away. And during this moment, Neville tells Harry about gillyweed. The movie then cuts to the next morning as the second task is about to begin, and Neville hands Harry some gillyweed. He then eats it before Moody shoves him into the water, and we watch as gills grow on his neck and webbing grows on his hands and feet. Then Harry does a quick flip and swims down into the water. Eventually he finds where the hostages are being kept by the Mer people and unties Ron's foot. However, he doesn't want to leave the others, so he tries to free Hermione as well. The mermaids stop him though, and Harry watches as Cedric arrives to take Cho. Victor Crumb then shows up as a shark head and bites Hermione free and then takes her, leaving Harry there with Ron and Gabrielle, Fleur's sister. Earlier on in the scene, we saw Fleur get taken by some Grindylows, and Harry sees that she isn't coming. So with Mer people scared off by Victor the shark, Harry frees Gabrielle and takes her and Ron to the surface. Before he can get there though, some Grindylows attack him and drag him down. He shoves Ron and Gabrielle to the surface, but he gets pulled down and just barely escapes after zapping the creatures. Then shooting above the water, he lands on the deck of the stands. We see Fleur kiss him and Ron in gratitude for saving her sister, and Dumbledore eventually awards each champion their placement. Cedric gets first, Harry gets second, Crumb third, and Fleur fourth. And that is where our scene ends for this week. So let's kick off our changes by looking at our first 3 categories of characters, timeline, and location. Starting off with characters, we have quite a few changes. First, for omissions, we're missing Moaning Myrtle, Dobby, Ludo Bagman, the Mer Chieftainess, and Madam Pince. Then for our additions, we see Barty Crouch Sr. when he shouldn't be there, as in the book he's supposedly sick at home. Plus, we see Rita Skeeter, even though we learn that she was specifically not at the second task, probably because she's banned from the school grounds. This doesn't really come into play this week, but in the next episode we'll be covering a chapter which discusses her next article. And in that article, she mentions something that was said between Victor and Hermione at the task. Hermione remarks that it's impossible for Rita to have heard her because she wasn't there at the second task, and Victor told her this in secret. But in the movie, we see her and her photographer standing right there. Of course, this entire Rita Skeeter subplot is removed anyway, so the movie didn't care about this. But I can't wait to discuss it in future episodes as Rita's secret is revealed. So stay tuned for that. Now moving on to timeline, we really don't have any crazy changes. Of course, per usual, the week leading up to the task was condensed for the sake of saving time in the movie. But in the chapter, we learned about multiple classes and the stress of trying to figure out how to breathe underwater all week. Finally, our location category only has a couple of changes. First, the stands for the students and the judges to watch was actually on the shoreline, not out in the middle of the lake. And second, the hostages were held in the city square of the Mer People's Village in the lake. That's right, they have a whole city down there, which really doesn't get shown in the movie, as it just looks like the ancient remains of some structures, not a town. Anyway, that wraps up our first 3 categories, and before I get into the plot, I wanted to shout out Jason, Joshua, Timothy, RoboSteve, and the rest of my incredible Patreon and YouTube members who help make these videos possible every month. Also, if you're watching this in real time, we're only about a week away from the next full cast audiobook being released on Audible. They launched The Philosopher's Stone in November, and this month they're releasing The Chamber of Secrets. The first one was so good, and I'm excited to give my full review of the second one after it comes out. If you'd like to listen for free, you can click the link in the description and claim your first month of Audible for free with it. This supports the channel and gets you one free audiobook of your choice, so you can get the Philosopher's Stone or save the credit for when the Chamber of Secrets is launched. And if you're watching this in the future, maybe all of them are out. So use the link below to claim your free trial and take your pick of the lot. Now with that being said, let's dive into the plot changes. First up, we once again have a classic J.K. Rowling intro in which we hear about multiple events in a sort of rapid-fire way. This time, it's not as rapid-fire as usual, but still there are 3 key things that happen at the beginning of this chapter that don't make their way into the movie. First, we learn about their charms class, which is where the chapter picks up. In this specific class, they're practicing banishing charms. If you remember from earlier in the book, they practiced summoning charms in the first semester, which is why Harry knew Accio so well, and now they're doing the opposite of that in the second half of the school year. This was the best place to talk as a trio because they couldn't be overheard by others, as everybody was separated throughout the classroom and having lots of fun tossing things around. Neville even accidentally banished Professor Flitwick, sending him flying across the room. We read that as Hermione perfectly performed the charm over and over, as usual, Harry told her and Ron about what had just happened the night before when he had almost been caught heading back from the prefect's bathroom. This is another key moment that isn't in the movie, but I talked about it in the last episode, so if you want to learn more, go check out that video. Anyway, Harry tells Ron and Hermione about how Moody saved him and also how he saw Barty Crouch's name in Snape's office. Harry's assumption is that Barty is investigating Snape. Once again, Snape is Harry's first guess for anything bad happening at Hogwarts. After this charms class, Harry goes on and sends an owl to Sirius, telling him about the night before and explaining the Moody Snape incident. Remember, Sirius had asked Harry to let him know if anything strange happens, and that certainly was strange. Sadly, it's only after sending his letter off that Harry realizes he never asked Sirius how to hold his breath underwater for an hour. So he, Hermione, and Ron are left to research it themselves all week. We learn about one of their study sessions as Ron suggested Harry use Accio to summon an Aqualung from the nearest Muggle town, but Hermione quickly denied that option as she said that Muggles would notice a set of tanks flying across town. They study some more and eventually get a reply from Sirius. He asks for them to send the dates of their next Hogsmeade trip, and they do, right before heading off to Care of Magical Creatures class. And this is the third thing from the beginning of the chapter that was removed, as the trio go to class and Hagrid is finally back to teaching as he's somewhat recovered from the whole giant scandal with Rita Skeeter. Seeming to want to win back the affection of the students, he has a baby unicorn to show them instead of blast-ended Scroots. Hagrid and Harry speak during the class, with Hagrid checking in on the youngest champion and stating his confidence in Harry to win. Once again, the guilt weighs down on Harry as he can't bring himself to tell Hagrid that he's got no clue how to survive the next task. Which brings us to our next change. You see, what we see in the movie with the trio studying in the library is somewhat accurate. That's what happens next in the chapter as they go back to keep looking for an answer to the breathing underwater situation. But as you can see, they skipped over quite a bit, which is what we just covered in the first change. But there's a tiny bit of truth for a split second in the movie as we get a glimpse of Hermione and Ron trying to help Harry the night before the second task. But it is short-lived, as we almost immediately have another change, and that is that Fred and George are the ones who come to get Ron and Hermione, telling them that McGonagall is wanting them to come to her office. And that brings us to another omitted section, as Harry stays and continues to study. It's not like the movie where Neville helps Harry put his books away. Harry stays all the way until 8 o'clock when Madame Pince, the librarian, kicks him out. Then he goes to the Gryffindor common room and studies more there. Then, after everyone else has gone to bed, Harry feels incredible guilt and shame as he pictures what everyone will say once he shows up the next morning and admits that he can't participate in the task. Determined to not let everyone down, he puts on the invisibility cloak and heads back to the library. He then studies a bit more under the cover of his cloak, but eventually falls asleep right there. We read about a funny dream he has as he imagines a mermaid holding his firebolt and taunting him with it as he tries to snatch it from her but fails repeatedly. Then in the dream, the mermaid starts poking him with the broomstick and he can feel it. Suddenly, he hears the voice of someone familiar telling him to wake up as they poke him. Which takes us into our next change, and that is Dobby. That's right, Dobby wakes up Harry in the library and tells him that it is 9:20, just 10 minutes before the next task. Dobby says that Harry must get down to the lake immediately to save his Wheezy, which Harry finds out means Weasley. But that's not all. You know how I said Neville never helped Harry put his books away like the movie shows? Well, Neville never even helped Harry figure out Gillyweed. That was all Dobby. Dobby tells Harry how he overheard McGonagall and Moody talking in the teacher's lounge about the task, and Moody mentioned gillyweed. Then Dobby hands Harry some gillyweed, and Harry runs down to the lake, making it with barely any time to spare, which, by the way, is another small change. In the movie, Harry and Neville walk to the lake with all the time in the world, but in the book, Harry almost sleeps through the second task, and if it wasn't for Dobby, he definitely would have. And with that, here are 3 more small changes we can do rapid fire. First, he and the other champions enter the lake from the shore. Second, Harry doesn't do a flip after growing his gills. In fact, it's a not-so-pretty transformation, but after he figures out what's happening, he sets out to find his treasure that's been stolen. At this point, he knows it is Ron because Dobby revealed that Harry needed to go save his Wheezy. And third, after setting out, he gets attacked by Grindylows almost immediately. In the movie, they save this for the end when he's bringing Ron and Fleur's sister to the surface. But in the book, it's right at the start and almost kills him right then and there. Anyway, moving on to the next change, another crucial detail the movie removed is the fact that Moaning Myrtle is the one who guides Harry to the right place where Ron and the other hostages are being held. Technically, she doesn't take him all the way there, but as Harry is working his way through the lake, Myrtle appears and points him in the right direction, saying that she won't get too close because the merpeople aren't nice to her. This is an incredible detail, as in the movie, Harry seems to just find Ron and the others by chance, which is pretty insane given how big the lake is. And speaking of the merpeople and the hostages, we need to address the rescue itself, as it's quite different in the book. First of all, Harry doesn't have anything to use to free the treasures from their bonds, so he at first tries to take one of the merpeople's weapons. They refuse and simply laugh at him, so he goes down and grabs a jagged rock. He then uses the rock to cut Ron free. But similarly to the movie, he doesn't want to leave the others, because so far, no other champions have appeared. And let's be clear here that in the book, Harry actually thinks that if the hostages aren't rescued, they will stay at the bottom of the lake forever and die. After all, that's what the egg's clue said. So that's why he's determined to save all 4 people. But just like the movie, the mermen stop him from saving Hermione and the others. Thankfully, Cedric eventually shows up and frees Cho, and then he mouths to Harry that Fleur and Victor are coming, so he better get a move on. At this, Harry is relieved and waits to see Victor arrive to take Hermione. However, this is another detail changed about the rescue, as Harry actually has to give Victor his jagged rock so he can cut Hermione free. You see, Harry watched at first as Victor tried biting her free, but he was worried that he'd accidentally bite Hermione in the process. So Victor used the jagged rock, freed Hermione, and then left. Harry waited some more, anxious for Fleur to arrive, but when she didn't come, he acted. Once again, the merman tried to stop him from saving Gabrielle, but Harry at this point wasn't going to put up with it. So he raised his wand and threatened the merpeople to leave on the count of 3. Sure enough, they did, and he freed both Ron and Gabrielle, taking them to the surface. He then arrived just as his gills disappeared, with the merpeople trailing behind him. And this brings us to our final change for this scene, which has to do with the scoring. Technically, the movie didn't change much other than the fact that the scores in the book are point-based, not place-based. Cedric gets 47 points, Victor 40, and Fleur 25. But Harry had arrived outside the time limit and he was last. What the movie doesn't include is the fact that the Merchieftainess came up and personally spoke with Dumbledore. Harry overheard them speaking in Mermish, and afterwards, Dumbledore announces that Harry is receiving 45 points for moral fiber. And the only reason he's receiving 45 is because one judge, meaning Karkaroff, isn't on board with giving him 50. Evidently, the merpeople had explained to the judges that Harry had arrived way before the other champions, and was so determined to save everyone that he was willing to fight the mermen to do it. At first, Ron and Hermione were mad at Harry for trying to save everyone, and thinking that Dumbledore actually would have let them die at the bottom of the lake. Harry did feel stupid, realizing that there's no way the judges would have let that happen. But hey, he's a Gryffindor for a reason. Always gotta be the hero, you know? Anyway, after Harry received his score, it became a joke with Ron making fun of Harry for his outstanding moral fiber. This score is what then tied Cedric and Harry leading into the final task, and is what ultimately had them both entering the maze at the same time. Of course, we've still got a bit before we get there, so be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for future episodes. And on that note, that ends things off for this week. What did you think of these changes? Let me know in the comments below. Also, make sure to subscribe to the new Harry Potter channel, because once the new year hits, I'll be uploading all Movies vs. Manuscripts episodes to that channel only. Anyway, have a great week, and I'll see you in the next video.